Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Washington Bureau Chief Tia Mitchell. Hey, Tia.
Hey, Greg.
Well, the general election is months away, but Jon Ossoff and Mike Collins are already fighting as if Election Day is around the corner. The two campaigns have wasted little time defining each other. Ossoff is casting Collins as an extremist puppet of President Donald Trump. Collins is portraying Ossoff as a hopeless liberal who votes in lockstep with national Democrats and is out of line with Georgia. And the attacks are only getting sharper. The race is one of the most closely watched Senate contests in the country, with control of the chamber potentially hanging in the balance. That means neither side can afford to let the other define the narrative first. So today on Politically Georgia, we're digging into the opening salvos of the Ossoff-Collins matchup and what these early attacks tell us about the race ahead. And Tia, let's start with Jon Ossoff's message from Beulah Missionary Baptist Church over the weekend.
To this day, this man makes excuses for those who carried out an attack to throw out your votes and install a defeated president. But Beulah, he forgets your power.
Tia, you wrote about this the other day for the AJC. You can find it on ajc.com. These candidates have wasted no time attacking each other. It was basically minutes after Mike Collins was declared the nominee that Jon Ossoff sent a blistering social media post, essentially calling him throwing the kitchen sink at him.
Right. And I think, first of all, I think we should point out, Greg, that it's by design, it's deliberate that Jon Ossoff is going to Black churches. I'm not saying he won't go to a synagogue or a white church, but he definitely is Black church heavy on his Sunday morning schedule. We know he's spoken to Pastor Jamal Bryant's church, New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Stonecrest. Jamal Bryant was a speaker at that initial rally with Keisha Lance Bottoms. So it's part of Jon Ossoff speaking to his base, knowing that he needs Black voters to turn out in November. But you're right, that message, I found it so interesting that, in the first 24 hours after the runoff, both candidates were not only trying to define themselves for a general election audience, but trying to define each other and trying to pick away at their stump speech, the story that they are telling voters about who they are and where they come from. So it's interesting to watch. Quite frankly, it's interesting also after my story came out to get a better understanding of, how these candidates are even going to approach the fact checking that naturally comes with writing about campaigns in their campaign messaging. And that's going to be interesting because, campaign messaging is all about trying to be memorable, attacks that kind of break things down into black and white and scrub some of the gray area away. But at the same time, I think that these candidates want to be seen as trustworthy, not seen as just slinging mud for the sake of slinging mud. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, and let's go back to Ossoff's target audience right now for these speeches, at least, before we get into Mike Collins' message, because you're right, Tia. In the runoff in 2020 and early 2021, we saw Jon Ossoff, of course, running as basically a campaign ticket with Senator Raphael Warnock, who of course is not on the ballot this time, knowing that, most of his campaign messaging, if not all of his campaign messaging through the very last stretch of that runoff was all geared towards Black voters. We talk a lot about, the swing ticket voters who tend to be whiter and more affluent and more suburban. But without 90+% of the Black vote in Georgia, Jon Ossoff will not be in the conversation right now, right? We will not be talking about Jon Ossoff in a re-election campaign if he can't get an overwhelming majority of the African-American base in Georgia. And that, exactly as you mentioned, helps explain why a lot of his messaging right now is, that he is going to Black churches like Beulah, like Antioch, like some of these other churches he's been to, but also why he's running in that basically a tandem ticket. They're not doing everything together, by any means. Keisha Lance Bottoms will have lots of campaign events without John Ossoff and vice versa. But they will be presenting themselves as a unified front in Georgia.
Yeah, and I think it's no mistake that their first rally was in Metro Atlanta. Their second joint rally is Savannah, Georgia. And they are going to not just where their base is, but those cities where Black voters reside. I think that the tandem, we've talked about this before, I think also helps John Ossoff because they can kind of speak to different parts of the base separately and then hope that they benefit from each other's distinct messages. Because not that Keisha Lance Bottoms won't be talking to Black voters. She will, and she'll be going to Black churches. But I think her message is going to be less overtly specific and targeted to Black voters than a John Ossoff would be. And I think that's going to be really interesting, again, as they continue to do things jointly.
Yeah, let's talk about Mike Collins' message now, too, because as expected, we are not going to see him back off his full-throated, his wholehearted embrace of President Donald Trump. That's what got him this far. He can't reinvent himself suddenly as some, critic of Donald Trump, and not that he wants to. Listen to him speak about Donald Trump's support just a few days ago.
We look forward to President Trump helping us in any way that he can. We are the Trump-endorsed candidate. People know I'm the MAGA candidate. I've been all over the country with President over the 24 cycle to make sure that we got him back into that White House and that he had somebody up there knowing that we've got his back.
But he's also got a message more broadly. He's got a message to those middle of the road voters as well. Those voters who prove themselves to be willing to split their tickets. And this is why his first main general election campaign ad is so interesting. Let's take a listen.
Unlike Washington politicians, Mike Collins knows how to deliver. One of the only members of Congress who has ever actually passed anything, Collins authored 2 laws signed by 2 different presidents. A bipartisan law signed by Biden to help law enforcement fight deadly drugs in our communities. And when Laken Riley was tragically killed, Collins worked with Trump and wrote the law to make sure that it never, ever happens again. Hard-working, bipartisan, results. Everything liberal John Ossoff isn't.
And Tia, the key words there, knows how to deliver and bipartisan results. So, on one hand, we've seen Mike Collins present himself as this MAGA warrior, this MAGA loyalist who is going to do everything the base wants him to do and fight for Trump's agenda. But now he's got to reach a second audience more so. And that is he calls it the Metro Atlanta audience. And he says that those sort of swing voters just want accomplishments in Washington.
Yeah, again, it brings me back to, I don't want to go too much on a tangent, but again, when you see political ads, they make things seem so black and white. And this is not just a Collins thing. This Ossoff, of course, as we get into his ads later, does it as well. But take the Laken Riley act, and he's like, yes, it was bipartisan, true. But to make sure it never happens again, well, unfortunately, young college women are still dying. Undocumented immigrants have been accused of crimes, including murder. And that is something that no law can prevent wholesale, right? Because crime exists in America for myriad reasons, not just because of our immigration laws. And some people would argue our immigration laws have nothing to do with crime in America because illegal immigrants or immigrants in general commit crimes at a much lower rate than natural born Americans. But my point is, if you look at the ad, he says, we passed this law and now it's never going to happen again. And it's just, again, an example, I think, for me to point out to our listeners and our viewers, you got to think critically as you see their messaging and dig deeper. I'm not saying the Laken Riley Act has not had an effect. It definitely has allowed law enforcement to detain illegal immigrants when they are accused of relatively minor crimes. But again, to make the bridge and say that's to ensure Laken Riley Act, make sure that it never happens again, that's a little bit of a over-promising. And then when you get into his attacks on Ossoff, the inflation, quote unquote, disaster, higher taxes on gas and groceries, crazy far left bills to let men compete in girl sports. Well, the Democrats have never introduced a bill to say, let men compete in girl sports. What they've done is said, we are not going to support bills that try to limit transgender athletes. We think that is something that states, local school districts, parents should worry about, not Congress. Higher taxes on gas and groceries. Where was that on the table? So, but, Republicans like to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and other bills passed during the Biden administration. Yes, Ossoff did support them. Yes, there are critiques, particularly from the right, on the price tag of the bills and whether the stimulus checks contributed to inflation during the coronavirus pandemic. So I just say that to say, again, Ossoff does it too. We'll get to it when we get to his ad, but it's way more nuanced than what these ads portray. And I think that's just important to be honest about as we're early in this campaign season.
Yeah, these are blanket accusations, right? These are blanket ads. There is the actual what the Laken Riley Act does, the specifics, and there's also what it represents. And for Mike Collins, it also represents that he got a bill done. He got the first bill that President Trump signed into law during his second term in office was a Mike Collins bill, right? So he can go on the campaign trail and say, I deliver results. Whether or not voters love those results or hate them, he can go and that's the message he's going to make to sort of the middle of the road voters, which is like me, don't know much about me. I've gotten results done in Washington. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about that from his camp, about the specifics of the bills, not just Laken Riley Act, but the other measures that he's sponsored. Before we get into that Ossoff ad, let's take a quick break because I think it's worth exploring more of the John Ossoff ad and the messaging. We've heard him from Beulah. We've heard him, of course, on the campaign trail, but let's hear one of his first major paid media messages of the general election campaign when we get back from this break. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with Tia Mitchell. A reminder, if you've got a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call the hotline anytime, leave a question. We'll play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. You can also email us anytime, day or night, politicallygeorgia@ajc.com. Okay, we've been talking about the opening attacks between Senator John Ossoff and Congressman Mike Collins. Let's hear, because John Ossoff had ads ready, trust me, ready for Mike Collins, but also, of course, for Derek Dooley if he was the nominee. I'm sure there was an ad for Buddy Carter somewhere in their files just in case he made it to the runoff as well. But right out the gate, John Ossoff had this basically a documentary style ad ready. Let's listen.
Truth is, Mike took over his dad's trucking company and followed in his footsteps straight to Congress. His rich daddy, a former congressman and career politician himself, handed Mike the keys to a company with dozens of employees, making multimillionaire Mike richer, while real truckers did the actual work. Maybe that's why Trump likes him so much.
Mike Collins, Mike Collins, Mike Collins.
And it might be why, in Congress, he's looked out for the richest 1% and big corporations instead of ordinary hard-working Georgians.
Well, hello, New York!
Like when he voted to double health insurance premiums for more than 1 million Georgians in order to give the wealthiest Americans and corporations another tax break. Or when he voted against releasing the Epstein files, covering for Trump and other powerful men.
Before we get into the substance of the ad, Tia, it was very strategic that they threw in the "Well, hello, New York" from Mike Collins. Mike Collins, of course, has been on the campaign trail for President Trump across the country, and but the easiest attack line, and the one that John Ossoff has faced since he first ran for office in 2017, is that he's sort of this out of state puppet for liberal interest in New York and in California. So them throwing the "well, hello, New York" line in there was kind of funny.
Right. I think that is funny. And quite frankly, Mike Collins, if he wants to be competitive with John Ossoff, I think I said this in a previous episode, he needs to raise some money from New York and California or Texas, where there are big pocketed donors, Vegas, where some big GOP donors are. Because Atlanta has some deep pockets, but Atlanta is not known for the deepest pockets in either party. So I think Mike Collins is going to continue to get on Ossoff because when you look at his FEC records, and yes, he still raises a lot of money. Georgia is the biggest donor state to Ossoff. He does also get out of state money.
Yeah, I kind of thought this sort of out of state attack prism was over with because, we saw in 2020 and 2021, Senators David Perdue, Kelly Loeffler raised unbelievable amount of money from outside the state, as did Ossoff and Warnock. And then in 2022, Herschel Walker, his campaign did a hell of a job raising money nationally. I mean, I talked to donors of theirs from Alaska, from all corners of the US. So I've written these stories many, many times of, Democrats raising out of state money, but also Republicans. John Ossoff did not become a financial juggernaut only from focusing in Georgia. And as you mentioned, neither should Mike Collins. I mean, he's going to be on Fox News and national cable networks as well. And yeah, he wants to get his message out. But the main reason those candidates go on those national outlets, or at least one of the main reasons, is to raise money. So expect Mike Collins to try to build a national fundraising operation. Will it match John Ossoff's? There's no way. John Ossoff has already amassed more than $30 million in his war chest. He's one of the most prolific fundraisers in not just Georgia history, but in national history. There was a time, Tia, where he raised more money than even presidential candidates, not the top tier candidates, but presidential candidates between 2020 and 2026.
Yeah, I agree. And the money is just, I think, a way for Mike Collins to signal. It's not just about John Ossoff raising money from New York and California. It's, again, the general attack of the coastal elites running the Democratic Party out of touch with the more everyday blue collar people of Georgia. And I do think that is definitely, we know, a line that resonates among Republicans and maybe even some independents when they worried that Democrats on affordability, inflation, jobs were not listening to the struggles that they expressed. But quite frankly, now we know that's a problem for Republicans. It'll be interesting if John Ossoff has withstood these types of attacks. Then I don't know how much we would think that the attacks would have more of an impact this cycle. But it looks like Mike Collins is trying, and Ossoff is trying to insulate himself from it a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, so that the main attack against Ossoff from Mike Collins was at the end of that ad. He's weak, he's woke, he's the worst of Washington. For Ossoff, I keep on looking at corruption as the framework that he's going to target Mike Collins. I mean, there's going to be lots of ways he's going to attack Mike Collins, but corruption and, being part of,
I was going to say like a bad person, like not just corruption, but like he's anti-Semitic, he's an extremist, he's a bigot, and he's corrupt. Like he's a bad person. To me, that's the message that I got from that first Ossoff ad. And I feel like that to me is a theme that we're hearing from Ossoff, even how he talks about Mike Collins, that earlier soundbite we played at the very start of the show, that also he's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He just hasn't earned anything. He's entitled. Just again, to me, I feel like there's a big poster board in the Ossoff headquarters that says Mike Collins is a bad person, and everything that they say about him is going to feed into that theme.
Yeah, anti-Semitic tropes. Bigot was the word that he used as well. And Tia, it'll be, this is a very personal race already. And you just knew that Ossoff's campaign was going to mine some of the more controversial social media messages that Mike Collins has made while on the campaign trail. There's not as much audio of him saying things on the campaign trail out there in Congress or you name it, but on social media, he developed a real persona for someone who would get lots of likes and lots of attention and lots of retweets and all that, and kind of made himself into this, if not national figure, at least a well-known figure in the GOP world with those social media messages. And Jon Ossoff is working to make sure that those come back to haunt him.
Yeah. And so to your point, Greg, you say that there isn't as much audio and video of Mike Collins saying controversial things. Well, Team Ossoff is trying. I was at a Mike Collins campaign event the day before the runoffs, and Team Ossoff had a tracker there with, the recording devices trying to catch him. I get it. That's something that we know happens during campaign season. They deploy young staffers or volunteers to try to get footage to see what they can catch from the stump speech that maybe, a candidate would be okay saying to a small audience, but wouldn't want put out there for everyone to see or hear. I don't necessarily think the tracker caught anything that particular day. But again, we know the trackers probably on both sides are out there listening and looking for what they could perceive as missteps or misstatements that they can capitalize on. But for now, what we do have is a plethora of posts on social media that, again, for Mike Collins's base, you could say that he was exaggerating, or they said, oh, these are memes and you don't get it. These are jokes. These are not to be taken too seriously. Or they would say he does mean it and he's speaking to a MAGA crowd that agrees with him. Mm-hmm. But a lot of these posts, when, the wider public caught wind of them, were like, wow, we think this is a little bit problematic. And, we know the most recent tweet posted by a staffer, but from an official Collins campaign account, making fun of a man whose wife made an allegation of rape against Matt Lauer. You've seen him say things about people or about circumstances that were labeled anti-Semitic. You've seen him, again, post things about January 6th or about the 2020 election that people think are problematic, given what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. So he's going to have to defend these things. I think what we'll probably hear from Team Collins is a distinction between what Mike Collins actually said versus what was posted on his behalf, probably from an affiliated social media site, but not necessarily him in his own words. I think we can expect Collins people to try to make a distinction. I don't know if that's going to work for people. He also did fire that top aide who we know was responsible for some of the sharper messages, or at least help contribute to that sharper attacks, sharper approach on social media. That staffer has been fired. We'll see if that also contributes to a change in tone.
And right now, we know that Jon Ossoff has that financial advantage. Odds are he'll have a financial advantage this entire race. He has always, as we said, been a financial juggernaut. Mike Collins has never been a prolific fundraiser. He didn't like overwhelm Derek Dooley or Buddy Carter in fundraising. They all kind of were around the same levels. So Jon Ossoff is going to use his advantage right now. Tia, before we end the show, I also want to go back to something you said earlier, because trackers, for some of our audience, they might not be as familiar, but this is such an interesting part of campaigning. There's trackers who are sent out not just by the campaigns, but also independent groups sometimes, the parties sometimes. Sometimes the trackers are so well known. I've been on the campaign trail with trackers who became sort of not part of the other campaign, but I've seen candidates buy trackers lunch and give them tickets to football games and things like that because they're such familiar faces. There are some candidates who say, hey, look, anything I say to a private room might as well be public. So they have no problem with trackers. And I've seen campaigns that block trackers from accessing rooms or put signs in front of their videos. I took a video once of this weird dance between a tracker and campaign staffers who were trying to block them. Generally speaking, most candidates I work with or I cover, tend to say, anything I say privately might as well be public. I'm treating everything as if it could be tracked anyway. You do see candidates get in trouble with that. There was a tracker who was on Rick Jackson the other day asking him about his stance on abortion. This was a tracker who was not out there with a camera. This was a tracker who was sort of posing as a conservative activist, so you see that. Candidates always have to be on their toes, though, in the modern world of campaigning in Georgia and beyond.
Yeah. And I think not necessarily, I don't know if there's any stories that come to mind in Georgia, but there have been stories outside of the state where there have been private fundraisers where the candidate, there was no media access, no public access. You had to pay a lot of money or be a +1 to someone who paid a lot of money to even get in the room. And the candidate let his or her guard down, said some things they thought they were saying to a friendly audience, and then it got out and became a bigger controversy. I want to say the binders full of women from Mitt Romney was an example of that. But I put that under the same umbrella as trackers because the opposing candidates, they try to find out when these private fundraisers are being held, and they try to get someone in the room to record. And again, see if the candidate says something that maybe a wider audience might raise their eyebrows at. Yeah. Or sometimes in the past, the campaigns didn't send someone, but someone who was maybe friendly to the other campaign heard something and passed it on. So that's something we know that, again, some candidates now are even more guarded in those private settings, but who knows what could happen this season.
Yeah, I've had waiters leak me audio from those fundraising dinners because if a candidate's there, nothing has been, jaw dropping, but if a candidate's there, it could be newsworthy. Okay, that's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you found us on YouTube, welcome to our channel. And please click the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. You can also follow the Politically Georgia podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Wherever you're listening, we always appreciate your comments, your ratings, your reviews, your feedback. politicallygeorgia@ajc.com. We'll talk to you next time on Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.